to hear from you on is the whole issue of online privacy. And I'm curious if you could briefly explain what the impact this bill might have on online privacy for Canadians, and whether or not there would be any concerns in respect of the privacy of online users.
Well, first of all, I have to say that Bill 63, Bill 63 doesn't talk about age verification. There's nothing in this bill about age verification. This is not, the word is not even used, and there's very little on pornography. What Bill 63 says is it talks about a very vague concept, which is, age-appropriate design. So they're saying that there should be age-appropriate design. Well, I'm sorry, but age-appropriate design is not age verification. It could be at some point if a committee decides, but it's not in the bill. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. About privacy, we have laws in Canada.
Sorry, if I could, though. I mean, I think one of the concerns on this is the whole issue of personal information, right? So if you... Okay, all right.
So... first of all, on this question, obviously, we have privacy laws in Canada. Why would suddenly those privacy laws would not apply to any company doing third-party verification? It's a nonsense. So I will quote some people that are more experts than me on that, which is the Age Verification Providers Association, who says, privacy-preserving age verification technology is already used at scale. It is highly effective, and our members have already completed over 1 billion age checks. Age verification can be designed to completely protect the identity of the user.
So on that basis, so who would design the technology you're proposing, or what technology are you proposing that be used? Would it be a private sector technology or government?
No, it would not be a government technology.
So the private sector would would be the entity
well,
that.
First
that
of all,
took, let me finish the question. Yeah. So what you're saying is the private sector would have access to individual Canadians' data. Is that what you're suggesting?
No, I'm suggesting that all of those questions will be resolved in the regulations. But what I'm saying to you is what we have in this bill is in Article 11. We have 5 principles that will assure that privacy will be respected. I will read the main one to you, which is maintains user, age verification method. The method that will be chosen maintains user privacy and protects user personal information.
But on this point, though, one of the concerns that people have raised is that 11.2 permits the use of what some would argue are inherently unsafe age verification methods by internet services, whether it's uploading of data, scanning social media activity. How do we assure Canadians that they will not be subjected to having to turn all this information over in order for this sort of age verification to take place? I think one of the things that I'm just trying to make sure is that we achieve the goal.
I'm not following you on 11.2. What are you saying here?
So under 11.2, would it not permit, I mean, as I read it, and it could be my read of it, it would permit the use of any number of options in terms of age verification.
But the options would have to follow those rules because they're in the bill. So no method that doesn't respect privacy could be chosen in regulation because regulation, as you know, have to follow the principles that are in the bill.
So who would own the? I guess let me try and simplify this. So in order for someone's age to be verified, who would control, hold, protect, and safeguard the data that is shared?
So the way it is done in other countries, for example, Germany, is a system of accreditation. Some companies who are specialists in this age verification can apply, and for them to be accredited to do age verification on Canadians, they would need an accreditation.
So in that regard, though, I mean, you've seen age restriction technologies and policies challenged in courts and jurisdictions in the U.S. and the U.K. How do we make sure that this doesn't end up with a challenge in the courts?
Well, up to now, in the U.S., they have lost. The porn companies who have sued have lost. Now it's said in the U.S., which is really very strong in terms of freedom of expression. There's already a court decision that says that those laws are not unconstitutional. So that's really interesting, because years ago it was the contrary. But now the problem is so prevalent of young people watching porn, children, that the courts have obviously changed their idea on it. And I would say
what I want to be clear on is that there's nobody here saying that let's give children unfettered access to porn. So let that not be the message that you're hearing. What I am trying to do is to make sure that whatever we do does not end up being challenged successfully in the courts. So, for example, you've talked a little bit about the U.S. The U.K., there's been a series of challenges. Other jurisdictions have seen challenges around this. And in Canada, where we have an ongoing debate in respect of people's privacy, how do we ensure that members, particularly of the LGBTQ2S+ community and others, do not find themselves on the wrong end of the wrong arm of the law? Without, to be clear, this is not about saying, let us give unfettered access to pornography to children. So let that not be the takeaway. My question is, how do we handle this in a way that protects young people, that provides people the assurance that what is being done here falls within the grounds of Canada's privacy laws, and that we're doing this in a manner consistent with the law?
Okay, so
I'll let the senator answer, and then we'll go to Madame Bichot.
I will just, on the question of lawsuit, in France, Germany, all the lawsuits have been lost by the porn companies. So we are not facing at this point a great challenge. On your second question, this bill goals is to protect all children, all minors, whatever their, from porn. What you're saying here is that particular members of the LGBTQ could be particularly vulnerable to the privacy issue. I haven't seen any study on that. We're seeing here, we are saying privacy will be respected. We have, on betting, on all kind of other questions, we are giving some of our identity to a lot of people. Why would here it'd be different, and why would this community be targeted? I'm sorry, I don't get it. In Canada, with the laws we have, what makes you think their name would come out?
Madame. On y va maintenant à Madame Michaud.
Ms. Michaud, you have the floor now. You have 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Madam Senator, for coming. I was looking forward to hear you talk about this very important bill, S210, an act to restrict young persons' online access to sexually explicit material, and also protecting young people from educating themselves on online pornography. I like the way you explained it at the beginning by saying that we are trying to do online what we're doing offline. So it was a lot simpler when children could not buy a review with pornographic material on it. Right now, it's a lot more complicated with all we have available online. On the contrary, there's no unanimity on this bill. As you have observed, the government voted against and had it sent here for it to be studied in committee. It's thanks to the vote of the other opposition parties that we're here today and that we are studying this bill, which is well designed. I read the bill. It's well done. I think it's a good bill. The Bloc Québécois is in favor of the bill, but it's not easy to work with age verification we have read what is happening in other countries. You mentioned Germany, the UK, France, and some states in the United States, Spain and Australia. What I am reading from what is happening in this country is that sometimes the law was never applied, pilot projects have been planned. We do not necessarily have any indication as to what the countries are doing concretely. What example should Canada copy? So I'd like to hear you tell us more about the question you mentioned before. Why allow it to be done through regulation instead of having it enshrined in law directly? Would you like the government to act through regulation? Are you not afraid that it should be done by regulation, knowing very well that this government does not like this bill? Answer. Let me start with the question regarding the countries. Germany has been doing age verification for years and years now through regulation. We received a testimony at the Senate. There has never been any information released. There are different methods that are used by companies and third parties that are accredited. So this is a system that works. Of course, they started applying regulations before Pornhub came, but international platforms are refusing to comply. In the case of Great Britain, a first bill didn't work, a second was adopted, and the regulations are underway. I know that that was one of the models that was considered by the government of Canada. The British law took years for it to be implemented. It's excellent. It mentions pornography. It says that we must attack pornography websites and so on because children are looking at a lot of porn on Twitter, even than on pornographic sites. So social media has to be considered. Yes, some countries are doing it. You are right. But these are the initial stages, so we cannot really say that Germany cannot be significant. For France, it's going to be in September. Now, to come back to your question on regulation, it's true that the government said they did not like my bill, clearly enough. But I still believe that governments have responsibilities, and once a bill becomes law, I trust that we will be looking for the best methods that best protect Canadians to carry out age verification. The government will be there. The government will consult experts. So I do not see why there will be any bad faith when it comes to regulation, because it doesn't benefit any Canadian if we have a bad age verification method. Thank you. So you say the best example should be Germany. Answer, that's one of the examples. The British law as drafted looks a lot more like our system, our legal system, and our government system. So right now, looking at the regulations concerning this law, they are now talking about age estimates, age assurances. Yes, you have identity cards, you have more standard methods, but there's also age estimation, which without collecting data enables people to estimate an ages within the range of 2 years. What is interesting in the British law is that they are saying that it's the responsibility of those providing porn to make sure that those methods, which normally should be applied by third parties, are working. So the responsibility is still there. It's stated that if there's a method to be used, not only are they to choose the method, but to implement the method. I have a few seconds left, but I would like to hear you say something. Well, the government says we don't need Bill S210. We have C63. It's not the same thing. C63 is important, but it's not the same thing as S210. Answer. Well, I was in favor of the first part of C63, talking about children. There are lots of good things in that bill, but strangely, there is no word on age verification, neither on pornography, which are amongst some of the important dangers that social media is presenting. So I was very disappointed by that. Well, you can say that maybe later on a committee will be set up to decide whether or not age verification is done. I am not reassured because you need to know that for me it's a very important public health issue because for the past 15 or 20 years, our children have been subjected to pornography without restriction, and this changes how they look at sexuality, which should be a beautiful thing. So I am for healthy sexuality, but that is not what pornography brings. I understand it's legal for adults, but it was never conceived to be something that children use to learn about sexuality. Not only does it take away all the mystery and dreams, but it makes them adopt horrible behaviors. They become more violent. There's a study that was shocking. More than 47% of young people, men and women, are saying that there must be violence in sexual relations, and that is what girls are expecting. Imagine where we are at. Thank you.
Mr. McGregor, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator, for joining us today to help us inform this committee on this bill. I voted in favor of this bill at second reading. I agree with the principle, and I think for a lot of members, not only around this table, but in the House of Commons, many of us are parents, so we come at this not from a professional interest, but also a personal interest. That being said, though, as a lot of my constituents and indeed many people who know I'm a member of this committee, it's generated a lot of correspondence. So, I come at this personally in trying to balance parents' real concerns over children's access, but also wanting to find a little bit more out about the people who are raising privacy concerns. And that's why I do want to pay particular attention to this study. One of the questions I had, we have received a number of briefs on this bill and recommendations. One of the recommendations was regarding to the ability to verify users' ages at point of access on devices rather than websites. Are you familiar with this technology? Yes. And why is? Can you explain the differences and maybe why you chose one path over the other?
Well, so this technology is promoted by Ethical Capital Partner, who's now the new owner of Pornhub. So they've been going around Parliament to promote this technology. I said to them, because we met, I said, listen, if you think you can convince the big Google and other to do it, fine. But at this point, we have, look at this, we have porn sites who are responsible for having let children watch porn for the last 20 years, who are saying, oh no, we're not the one who are gonna verify age. Let somebody else do it. So obviously, to start with, it's a little strange. And then this whole idea of having, I have nothing against having some age verification in the telephone, but nobody does it around the world. This technology may be one day possible, but at this point, it's not the case.
And that's because of the sheer variety of devices out there? Like
well,
some people might be using a laptop, a phone, or an old desktop computer?
It's because you would have to have a lot of Google's, Microsoft, all of them would have to agree to do that. And we have no indication at all that this is a new method that some countries are taking. Nobody has taken this route yet. I'm not saying it's not a great route, but it doesn't exist now.
Now, I want to get into some of the weeds of the bill. So when I go through your bill on page 3, section 6, sub 2, This is the defense, legitimate purpose. So no organization shall be convicted of an offense under Section 5 if the act that is alleged to constitute the offense has a legitimate purpose related to science, medicine, education, or arts. Now, if I were to go out in the street and ask people about the term legitimate purpose, I think it's a term that's very open to interpretation. Can you maybe explain what you see it as the bill's sponsor?
Well, I understand that this defense is used in different circumstances. Obviously, there is a question of interpretation, but I would say, that people who say that nude, that essentially showing a nude on the social media would be problematic. I don't think, not only they don't understand this particular definition, but it's larger than that. Sexually explicit material does not refer to simple nudity. It's a term in the criminal code. And and this definition is very, very, very specific. And I will read it in French. Sorry, I have the...
Well, I don't need you to read it. I have it in front of me, and
it's
there in the criminal code.
The goal has to be sexual in nature. It's not only nudity. It has to be there for excitement.
So you feel that clearly helps define the term legitimate purpose, the fact that it is in existence in the criminal code. Okay, that's good. That's what I wanted to know. The other part I wanted to get to was on page 5, section 9, sub 5A. This is about the effect of the federal court order. And in this section, it says that court order may have the effect of preventing persons in Canada from being able to access material other than sexually explicit material made available by the organization that has been given notice. So what other material do you think could be prevented from people having access to, and why did you include this section in the bill? Can you clarify this a little bit more for me?
Okay, so if you permit, I will answer in French on that. D'abord, il faut qu'on...
First of all, you need to understand that before blocking a site, there has to be time for the targeted site to receive notice and 20 days to decide whether or not they will be complying with the law. And then after that, that is assigned to a federal court, which itself deliberates over it and decides whether or not we have attained the stage where that site has to be blocked. I'm trying to say that this is a method that corresponds to Canadian legal standards and protects those that we want to punish because they have recourse. They can turn to the courts to defend themselves. Once all that has been done, and we consider that the pornographic site is not doing anything, it's not taking any action, then the question of blockage comes in. And when the site is blocked, when an internet service provider is told that they can block a site. If, for example, on a website, 50% of the material is pornographic and 50% is non-pornographic, or there's 70 and so on. Once a site is blocked, most of the pornographic material is blocked. Thank you. The reason is simple. It's up to the site to decide whether or not they want to block, or that they want to comply with the law. Let's take the example of a bar. If a bar allows in kids or children who can drink alcohol in the bar, eventually the bar will have its license withdrawn. The license will be withdrawn not only for children, but for adults as well.
Désolé. Mr. McGregor, thank you. We go now to Mr. Jenis. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Senator. I think it's really important to clarify this issue of site blocking because I think there's been some misinformation around it. So to be really clear, and if you can clarify this, but site blocking is only a penalty for those who persistently refuse to violate the law. So if I commit a crime, I might go to jail. And if I'm sent to jail, that violates my mobility rights and my ability to do all kinds of other things that I would normally be able to do. But that's because I've committed a crime and I'm being penalized for it. In the same way, this bill isn't about site blocking in general. It only allows that to be used as a penalty for those who persistently refuse to follow the law. Is that correct?
This is correct. And if I could add here that in Germany, Twitter was carrying non-porn material and porn material. The government said, you're not doing age verification. And finally, what happened was that Twitter dropped all their porn part. And then they decided by themselves, because they didn't want to be submitted to the age verification law. Twitter just had 60 pages off their site in Germany. So regulations work.
Yeah.
That's what I want to say here.
Thank you. Now on the social media issue, some critics have said, hey, this would apply to social media that choose to host pornographic content and show it to children. But the point would seem to me that if you can't serve alcohol to children at a bar, you also can't serve alcohol to children at an ice cream stand. That if we determine an activity should be age protected, then that age verification has to necessarily exist in every context where that content could be shown to children. The solution is it's not age verification for those sites in general, but it is specifically for the pornographic content we're talking about, because Twitter shouldn't be allowed to show pornography to 9-year-olds. Neither should any other website.
And it's fairly easy to do, because if you've been on Twitter and you've tried to find porn, you will see that there's a page. It announced that sensitive content is coming. So Twitter knows where it is. So it's easy to find, and it can be age blocked, age verify, all those things work. And I would also take this analogy that children, can't go in a bar and drink, but they are allowed to go to restaurant, and then the server is not allowed to have them drink. So it's not so much where, but it's the pornographic content that we're aiming at, and this is where it has to be stopped, because it's obviously not only with porn site, but also on social media platform. And this is where many times the first opportunity for children to have even pops up of pornography.
Yeah. Now, it seems obvious to me that in the world of rapidly evolving technology, there's no way you could put in the text of legislation precisely the kind of age verification method that would be used. That would forestall the process of gradual improvement in terms of effectiveness. But for those who are skeptical of government power in general, what are the safeguards on the regulation-making process that are in the bill and that exist in general?
Well, I would go back to Article 11. Because, this came out of the process in the Senate. This was an amendment, because obviously we got the same concerns, and we said, okay, let's put real safeguard in the bill, and they are at Article 11, and, so the method that will be chosen have to be reliable, maintain user privacy and protects user personal information, collects and use personal information solely for age verification purpose, destroy any personal information collected for age verification purpose once the verification is completed. We're talking here about destroying it, and then generally complies with the best practices. And yes, in truth, how could we have chosen age verification method? I've been on this for 4 years. The world has evolved and technology has evolved.
Senator, that's extremely clear in the text of the bill. And I guess to conclude my questions, I mean, how do you account for the volume of misinformation, outright disinformation? I think some of it may be coming from certain industry groups, but how do you account for the volume of just nonsense, frankly? Because there are some people that are scared about what would happen if this bill is passed because they don't understand what it's about at all. How do you account for that, and what's your response to that?
Well, I think it's easy to scare people with disinformation. And I'm, for me, I'm incapable of understanding that this falsehood becomes more important than protecting all the children. And as we all know, our rights defended by the Charter are not absolute. Yes, freedom of expression exists, and adults will continue to be able to watch porn. But what about the children? What about the children? This is also, they have rights. So, the United Nations is asking countries now to have age verification system. When I started this bill, it was not as well known. Now time passes, and now it's a real public safety issue. And I think it has to be addressed.
Désolé. Mr. Gahir, go ahead, please. 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Clerk, and thank you, Senator, for appearing before the committee. The question that I have is, the legislation that you've proposed doesn't itself include a definition of sexually explicit material or pornography, but it rather refers to a section of the criminal code and making sexually explicit material available to children. Is that right?
Yes.
That's correct. Okay.
It's, I will,
Sure.
We refer to, pornography doesn't exist as such in the criminal code to talk about adult sexually explicit material. It exists only to talk about child pornography. So the known term is sexually explicit material, and I would read you the definition because when we read...
I guess my question is, why didn't you provide a definition of that in your proposed bill? Why are you relying on the definition?
This is the way that it's
code?
done. What I'm doing in this, I'm referring, in the definition, I'm referring to materials, sexually explicit material. And in bills, you don't give the criminal code definition. They stand by themselves in the criminal code because if they're changed, you don't want that to affect your bill.
Sure, that's fair.
So I will, I want to read it in the record what it is.
So I
No?
think, we can
you don't want me
read.
to
I just
read
have
it?
limited time, so I do want to get on
Okay.
to my question. If that's okay, I apologize. So by relying on that external definition, were you aware that the majority of online streaming organizations, and we can think of household names like HBO, Hulu, and Netflix, which are commonly available to families across this country, that they're not accessed for their pornographic content, but they do host content that sometimes does contain sensitive aspects and some aspects of sexually explicit material. Were you aware that they would also be implicated within the wording of the bill as it's currently presented?
They were not. No, I didn't consult with them, but I will read you. I think you have to understand what is the definition of sexual.
So
but
I apologize.
because it's not just nudity.
Sure.
And it's not sensitive material. I will quote Professor Trudel, who's a specialist of those questions, and who says, and I will quote. You have your translation. So, dans l'arrêt Sharp.
In the Sharp decision, the Canadian Supreme Court specified that the expression explicit sexual activity refers to intimate sexual activity represented in detail and that is clear with the intention to sexually stimulate people that are consuming such material. We are not here.
I guess the aspect that I'm reaching out about is that when you have online content, especially on Netflix or HBO or Hulu, the interpretation could be different of whether that's actually meant to, whether that scene of that entire movie is what it's meant for. Do you believe that the non-pornographic content in these shows that are available across this country, should they be evaluated and regulated and carry the same legal liability that as content that you would propose that you're trying to capture under your bill?
No, I think I don't really get your question in the sense that they're two different things. Scenes of nudity, scenes of love, scenes of are not the same as sexually explicit material. It's been defined by the criminal court. It's been refined by the jurisprudence, and we're talking here about the equivalent of pornography. It's just that the expression used in the criminal code is sexually explicit material. It's
Sure.
the same thing.
I think the worry is that the wording of the bill as it's currently presented is overbroad, and it will capture these areas of content in Canada that are widely available, and that,
This is the definition in the criminal code. There's a definition of pornography, and it's sexually explicit material. So if you don't use this definition, what else do you use? The idea here is to protect the children, the minors, from pornography. And this is the tool we have that has been of service, since decades on that matter.
So as this bill was being drafted and the language is being drafted, was there any consultations done or any sort of work done to ensure that content that's not supposed to be covered is not covered?
Well, yes, I told you, Pierre Trudel was one of the experts testifying, and we have obviously consulted with experts. I've been working on this bill for 4 years, so obviously it's not a perfect bill, but sexually explicit material refers to to things that are there to excite, to close up of sexual organs. We're not talking here about very rosy pictures. This is very different. I've watched pornography to do this bill, and you would not find it difficult to differentiate what you see on HBO and when you see on a porn site. I'm sorry to say, it's very, very, very different.
Thank you. We'll have to wrap that up. On y va maintenant, Madame Michaud.
Ms. Michaud, 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very interesting conversation. I imagine the kind of things you have been dealing with for the past 4 years. You said the bill has been studied twice at the Senate, so clearly some changes must have been made to the bill. A while ago, you talked about Section 11 and said there were some concerns when it comes to privacy issues. Could you please tell us more about some of the changes that have been done since the original version of the bill? Are these changes positive in your opinion? Answer. All the changes that have been done were things I agreed with totally in the first version of the bill. Don't forget, I started working on this bill during the pandemic. Everything was complicated. We made some corrections. I presented amendments to correct 2 errors. The first was that at the beginning, they were talking about persons and not organizations that were targeted in the offense. So there was a danger that the lives of sex workers could be complicated. So the idea was that we were not trying to target individuals, but organizations as defined in the criminal code. That was changed. We also enhanced the second section of the bill to add recourse through the federal court. At the beginning, it was like in some countries, an offense is noted. If the law is not complied with, then there's blocking. So we added the remedy through the federal court to make sure that there would be no political intervention, no ideological intervention in the decisions. Everything had to depend on facts that could be counter-verified or cross-checked by the court. Question. There's no date. Well, there's a date for entry into force for the bill, but for the regulation, is it possible in such a bill to say that the age verification regulation has to enter into force from a certain date? Because we worked on C-21, and the regulations had to enter into force regarding C-71 that was done before. It had not entered into force. It took a few years. How can you make sure that the government would speed up this age verification implementation regulation if it's adopted? Answer, you are right. Age verification should be done. The regulation should be prepared for the bill. It has to be implemented. I think 1 year is a reasonable time, given that we can see what is happening in France, in Great Britain, 2 countries we know well, and they would have set up all their regulations in the coming months. So our government will have examples.
2 minutes and a half, please. We're going to do the...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator, I think the one part I wanted to focus on, and as my colleagues have, is on the regulations section of this bill, like specifically Section 11. Now, 11.1 is very easy to understand, but on 11.2, I just had some questions about the wording, because it says, and I quote, before prescribing an age verification method under subsection 1, the governor and council must consider whether the method, and then you've got A through to E. But I question the choice of wording must consider, because that seems to give the government a way out. Like, oh, we considered these 5 points. Wouldn't it be stronger to say something like the governor and council must verify that it is reliable, that it maintains privacy, that it collects and uses personal information solely for age verification? I think for me as a parent and looking at this, if I actually had wording in the bill that the governor and council must do this rather than considering it, do you see where some people might have concerns? Because the language in the bill might be giving the government a way out. Okay, yes, it has to consider it, but doesn't have to verify that it is actually in place.
I would say that obviously, consider as some strength. But the age verification methods are all different. And from my reading, some will be, some of those won't apply. If you do, for example, age estimation, you're not collecting personal data. So, some of those rules will not apply. So depending on the age verification that will be put in place, you will use them or less. So I think that's why there was a prudence in choosing consider instead of must apply.
Okay. So, so that was the rationale, was because of the different technologies are out there, they wouldn't necessarily all satisfy all of these points.
No.
But given the privacy concerns that are being expressed, wouldn't we want them all to kind of comply with these points? I mean, I don't know if you would want 4 out of 5 in this case.
If there's no collecting of personal information, it doesn't need to apply.
Right.
So I think it leaves some leeway for the different methods chosen. But I take your point.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. We go now to Mr. Shipley. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Senator, for being here today. My first question has to do with, I wasn't sure, someone earlier in the hour, I'm not sure if it was the Chair or yourself, Senator, mentioned, and I believe the number was 4 times this different bill you've tried to get through. Could you expand on that? And where and why has that stopped other times?
That's interesting. It's all my life in the 4 last year. Well, not all of it, because I'm a senator on other things too. But yes, I started in 2020. In fact, I went to demonstrate in front of Pornhub against illegal sexual material. They had child pornography. There were some really serious accusation and allegation of child pornography. So I went there, and after this demonstration, I started to talk to myself about, so what are the children doing during this pandemic? And they were on their screens. And that's where the whole idea started to become real. So starting in 2020, I had a first round with my bill, which was, went through the committee. I had tough questions, a lot of questions. I made some changes, and we were still in the pandemic. And then the election was called. So in this process, I had passed in the Senate, the bill was passed in the Senate, and then it died, and then it was off the books. So I had to start all over again after the election, from first reading, and do the whole process again with different people in the committee. And the more I went through it, the more supporters I had. And at the end, there was no opposition in committee and no opposition in the Senate when this bill was passed. So it took a long time, but I'm told it's not completely out of the ordinary, that private member's bill can take time. In this case, I was not served because of the election arriving at the time it arrived.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad I asked that because I thought the number was 4. It sounds like it's been twice, and thanks for the clarification on that. One of the concerns, obviously, I don't think anybody in this room feels that children should be accessing any types of pornography. But one of the issues is, quite frankly, is the age verification in the process. You had mentioned, and the bill mentions, that this is going to be done by a third-party company. Are there currently any Canadian companies who do this type of business, and who would they do it for? I mean, just specifically the age verification.
Yoti, mais c'est pas canadien. Yoti is one of the main players, but it has a place of business, I think, on the West Coast, but it's originally from Britain. YOTI. So this is one of the big players in age verification. There's quite many of them, but I think as a Canadian, there's one.
To interrupt, though, do you know who or what? There's a joke there, but I'll leave Mr. Biddle alone on that one. Who?
About you,
He really
maybe?
threw me off there. Who or what industries are they age verifying? You mentioned the company, but what are they doing now? What other for who? For what?
Well, it's a good question. I know there's age verification, for example, in betting online, but is it done by age verifier or in this case by the credit card? So I don't think we have a lot of age verifying in Canada. I'm sorry, I'm not able to answer intelligently your question. Would you want me to send you
That'd
an
be a
answer?
good answer. As I said, I'd like to know.
I think I have not researched that part.
Look at that. I've thrown you right there a loop. So there you go. That's why we're here. But yeah, I would like to know a couple of the names of companies and what industries they're currently doing for age verification. One of the other studies we've recently done in here was about cybersecurity, and it was astounding to hear about some of the companies, governments, big organizations who have been hacked, and a lot of private information has been taken or ransomed. Are you concerned about that at all with this? We've heard of one Canadian company. I'm sure there's others, hopefully. We don't know the size of them. We don't know who they're doing. Do you have any concerns with them and their cybersecurity of personal information?
I think we're all concerned, but when you have companies like Desjardins in Quebec, where we put our money, who has that type of problems, it obviously can happen everywhere. But I'm wondering, why would it be more of a problem or of a risk, I should say, with pornography than with banking, with all kind of other sectors? It's, once you start to be on the web and to transmit information on the web and do banking on the web, all those things exist. But as I say, on this question, in Germany, where they have the longest experience, they have not been les fuites de données, big scandals on that side with privacy of data.
Merci, madame. Thank you. We go now to Mr. Before I carry on, so feel free, obviously, to submit any further information you may wish to the committee.
Sir, a good question.
And they will be distributed. We'll go now to Mr. Biddle for the hammer. 5 more minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Before I ask my question, Senator, I do want to say that I think we all do appreciate the goal that you're trying to accomplish. It's I do have many concerns about how we're attempting to accomplish this. And I'll give it through an example. One of my favorite shows of all time is Game of Thrones. Love that show. Became obsessed with it, saw it, watched it through, watching the spin-offs. It's on a Canadian provider, Crave. It would be covered by this legislation as it's defined. And so I have staff who I know are fans of Bridgerton on Netflix, which is another internet service provider that provides what is defined as sexually explicit content. But I know you're trying to prevent children from seeing pornography, but you didn't define in your legislation pornography, you defined sexually explicit content. And so things like the shows that I mentioned, even Academy Award-winning movies, Schindler's List, English Patient, Shakespeare in Love, Gladiator, Crash, 12 Years a Slave, Shape of Water, Green Book, Parasite, based on the definition in the criminal code, these would all be covered. And so I guess my question is to you is why this overly broad definition, and why didn't you come up with a stronger, stricter definition of pornography rather than just using the sexually explicit definition in the criminal code?
Monsieur Biddle, si vous le permettez, je vais vous répondre.
Mr. Biddle, if you allow me, I'll answer in French. But I totally disagree with your premise because neither Game of Thrones nor Bridgerton, which I watch religiously, contain pornography. Neither do they contain sexually explicit material as defined in the criminal code. Here, I have the impression that you are not referring to the definition of sexually explicit material as drafted in the criminal code.
Much time. I'm looking right at the definition now. Dominant characteristic of which, and this is sexually explicit material, the dominant characteristic of which is the depiction for a sexual purpose of a person's genital organs or anal region, or if the person is female, her breasts. That is section 171.1 sub 5. Yep. That is very broad when it comes to what Canadians see on television, which they access without a digital ID. And you're proposing to change that and alter that. I think Canadians expect that when they go on to Netflix or Crave or the platforms, Amazon Prime, that they're able to access these shows without a digital ID to be able to do so. You're coming at this, and there's an old Supreme Court decision from the United States about pornography. I know it when I see it. And you're kind of making that position now and pointing us to, well, there's this criminal code definition, but it is very broad, Senator, and it is going to capture so much more content than I know you don't intend to. But this is the language of the legislation. And how can Canadians be assured that they won't be brought into this based on the wording of the legislation that I've just read, and I know you've been trying to read it to some of my other colleagues.
Yes, because, contrary to you, I don't think this is that broad. And I believe that if you look at the jurisprudence on how those particular 3 words have been interpreted by court, you will see, and earlier I quoted Professor Trudel, who was quoting the Sharp decision.
Judge.
No, he's not a judge.
Yes.
But he's an expert, and he's a legal expert. So, you're right that we can always say there's a danger. But what would you suggest? What kind of definition would we suggest? Because pornography.
Again, Senator, you're in a we know it when we see it kind of item. I don't have much more time. I don't have much more time left. But I'll point. We've left the agency you've left the agency that's going to police this very vague. But really, the only agency that exists that the federal government has is the CRTC. Is this what you expect? Who you will expect will be policing this legislation?
I did not include it because I didn't want to have to weigh on that. I think those decisions.
But that's the most likely agency to deal with it, yes or no? The RCMP?
No, no, no. It's just that
It'll be the CRTC. They are the most likely competent agency to deal with this.
it has remained undefined because, as you know yourself, your own government is these days trying to have a commission, an ombudsman, and all those things.
But you'll agree with me, it's the CRTC is most likely. You don't want it in there because it wouldn't be popular, but you'll agree with me that the CRTC is the most likely agency to deal with this.
I'm not agreeing with you.
So some mythical agency that the government will create is a better agency to deal with it? So with
Mr.
respect
Biddle,
to agencies that exist, Senator, you agree with me, this is the agency that is most likely to police this particular piece of legislation.
We're going to have to cut it off with, you may answer, and then we'll cut it off.
Well, I'm not gonna be pushed to answer with a question. You agree with me? It's not the kind of question I like. We have not defined in the bill who it is, so you can certainly think what you're thinking, but I would come back to the fact that, what would you have done to define pornography without taking the definition of the criminal code, which is one of our main law in Canada, and which is serious, and which has been interpreted by all the courts as being pornography, not as being, artsy pictures of whatever. And, you're right that there's a dose, it's not scientific, but I would say this definition is pretty good and has been used in the past to show that this is not light. This is pornography we're talking about when we're using sexually explicit material. So we disagree.
Merci. So thank you both. Thank you to Mr. Lucier and Senator for bearing with us here tonight. And with that, we will, this concludes this portion of the meeting. We'll suspend and bring in the next panel. Suspended. So I call this meeting back to order. I would like to welcome our witnesses for this second hour. From the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, we have Mr. Philip Dufresne, Privacy Commissioner of Canada. We have Lara Ives, Executive Director, Policy, Research, and Parliamentary Affairs, Directorate. And we have from the Department of Canadian Heritage, we have Owen Ripley, Associate Assistant Deputy Minister, Cultural Affairs. We have Katie O'Meara, Policy Analyst. And we have Galen Teschner Weaver, Policy Analyst. So I missed the hyphen in there first. So now, Mr. Dufresne, thank you for waiting, and you've been very patient. And I now invite you to make an opening statement of 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, Mesdames.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to appear on your study of Bill S-210, an act to restrict young persons' online access to sexually explicit material. As Privacy Commissioner, my mandate is to protect and promote individuals' fundamental right to privacy. This includes providing advice, guidance, and recommendations for protecting personal information and overseeing compliance with Canada's two federal privacy laws, the Privacy Act, which applies to federal government institutions, and the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, or PIPEDA, which is Canada's federal private sector privacy law. In January, I launched my strategic plan for my office, which is focused on 3 priority areas: maximizing the OPC's impact on promoting and protecting the fundamental rights to privacy, addressing and advocating for privacy in times of technological change, and championing the privacy rights of children.
Purposes of Bill S-210, which include protecting the mental health of young people from the harmful effects of being exposed to sexually explicit material. The bill does raise some privacy implications, and I would propose some changes to address them. As drafted, the bill provides that any organization that makes sexually explicit material available online to a young person for commercial purposes is guilty of an offense and liable to a fine that would increase in amounts depending on whether it was a first or subsequent offense. A defense is available if an organization believes that the young person was at least 18 years of age, having implemented a prescribed age verification method to limit access to the sexually explicit material. Age verification can raise privacy implications as it generally requires the collection of personal information, which could include biometrics or identity documentation. As drafted, the bill would apply to services such as social media and search engines that may make available some sexually explicit material, but that may be primarily focused on other content. This could result in age verification requirements that, including when the majority of content may not be of a sexually explicit nature. To address this, the committee could consider restricting the requirement for age verification to websites that primarily provide sexually explicit material for commercial purposes. Avant de prescrire un mécanisme de vérification de l'âge, le gouvernement...
Before presiding the age verification method, the Governor and Council will need to consider certain criteria, including whether the method maintains user privacy and protects users' personal information. I would recommend these criteria are important. I will recommend adding additional criteria to the list to ensure that the prescribed methods are sufficiently privacy protective. Specifically, this could include assessing whether the prescribed methods are proportionate and limit the collection of personal information to what is strictly necessary for the verification. Age verification methods should also prevent tracking or profiling of individuals across visits to websites or services.
Jurisdictions have taken action to prevent children from accessing pornography, but some of these laws have a narrower application than Bill S-210. For example, Texas and Utah only require age verification measures on sites that meet a certain threshold of pornographic content. Some regulators have also worked to mitigate the privacy risk associated with the use of age verification technologies. For example, Spanish and French regulators have worked with researchers to develop and evaluate potential age verification mechanisms. Le commissariat poursuit ses recherches dans ce domaine.
My office is conducting further research in this area and is a member of an international working group with other privacy regulators to share information on age verification methods and learn from each other's experiences. Notably, members of this working group intend to publish a joint statement of principles for age assurance later this year. My office is also developing guidance for organizations on age assurance and privacy and will launch an exploratory consultation on this next month.
10 be adopted. I will be happy to provide advice on regulations that pertain to privacy and the protection of personal information at the appropriate time. I will be pleased to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dufresne. We'll go now to Mr. Ripley. I invite you to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for inviting me to appear before you to discuss Bill S-210. As Associate Assistant Deputy Minister for Cultural Affairs at the Department of Canadian Heritage, I am responsible for the proposed Online Harms Act contained in Bill C-63. During elaboration of C-63, the department heard directly from experts, survivors, civil society, and members of the public on what should be done to combat the proliferation of harmful content online. A common theme emerged from these consultations: the vulnerability of children online and the need to take proactive measures to protect them. It is with this in mind that the Online Harm Bill proposes a duty to protect children, which will require platforms to incorporate age-appropriate design features. Furthermore, Bill C-63 also proposes a specialized regulatory authority with the skills and expertise to develop regulations, guidelines, and codes of practice in consultation with experts and civil society.
10 seeks to achieve a similarly admirable goal of protecting children online. However, the bill is highly problematic for a number of reasons, including a scope that is much too broad, both in terms of regulated services as well as regulated content. Possible risk to Canadians' privacy, especially considering the current state of age verification frameworks internationally. Structural incoherence that seems to mix criminal elements with regulatory elements. A troubling dependence on website blocking as the primary enforcement mechanism, and finally, a lack of clarity around implementation and an unrealistic implementation timeline. I'll briefly unpack a few of these concerns in greater detail. As drafted, Bill S210 would capture a broad range of websites and services that make sexually explicit material available on the internet for commercial purpose, including search engines, social media platforms, streaming and video on demand applications, and internet service providers. Moreover, the bill's definition of sexually explicit material is not limited to pornography, but instead extends to a broader range of mainstream entertainment content with nudity or sex scenes, including content that would be found on services like Netflix, Disney Plus, or CBC Gem. Mandating age verification requirements for this scope of services and content would have far-reaching implications for how Canadians access and use the internet. While efforts are underway globally in other jurisdictions to develop and prescribe age verification technologies, there is still a lack of consensus that they are sufficiently accurate and sufficiently privacy-respecting. For example, France and Australia remain concerned that the technology is not yet sufficiently mature, and testing of various approaches is ongoing. Over the next couple of years, the UK will ultimately require age assurance for certain types of services under its Online Safety Act, and Ofcom is currently consulting on the principles that should guide the rollout of these technologies. But the requirement is not yet in force, and services do not yet have to deploy age assurance at scale. And in jurisdictions that have already moved ahead, such as certain U.S. states or Germany, there continues to be questions about privacy, effectiveness, and overall compliance. In short, these international examples show that mandates regarding age verification or age assurance are still a work in progress. There is also no other jurisdiction proposing a framework comparable in scope to Bill S210. Website blocking remains a highly contentious enforcement instrument that poses a range of challenges and could impact Canadians' freedom of speech and Canada's commitment to an open and free internet and net neutrality. Je tiens à refermer une fois de
I'd like to reiterate once again that the government remains committed to better protecting children online. However, in the government's view, the answer is not to prescribe a specific technology that creates a danger for privacy and breaches our commitment towards an open internet. It is essential that all measures developed to achieve this objective create a framework that is both flexible and informed about what needs to be done to protect children online. Thank you for your attention, and I'm ready to take your questions.
Thank you for your remarks. We'll go now to our questions. We'll start with Mr. Caputo with 6 minutes, please.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here on this important matter. I think that it goes without saying that everybody around this table believes that protecting children from materials that they shouldn't be consuming is of great importance, particularly sexually explicit materials. I have a 10-year-old son, and it's unfortunately time to have the talk because we heard